Okay, number 5. So hopefully, number 5 is the quantitative fiscal policy with a free lunch. So basically, this is where we stand with the economy. We have 3 groups, A, B, and C, 3 different visions of where we're going, and hopefully give you some idea of what the financial market people are thinking to create the financial mania, which is really unusual when the economy is floundering as it is, to also have this level. By the way, there's one other major part of the financial mania that I omitted, which is important: the PEs. The PEs are on page 7. Now, if this doesn't give you some idea of risk, I just wouldn't. A picture's worth 1,000 words, so I almost don't have to say anything. These are the PE explosions that have taken place in the U.S. equity market, and this is the PE based on operating earnings, and it has elevated to the high 20s. Usually, and now that's on trailing, based on operating earnings, but it's trailing earnings. It was the last quarter, not future. They're trying to justify this PE by a projection by the analyst that, after all, we're following this path C, and it's going to get so much better, so much faster, that we can justify paying what PEs of 28 on trailing earnings, because earnings are going to double, and then it becomes 14. And they think it's going to happen quickly, which is somewhat, you really have to be a firm believer in path C to the extreme. So those are numbers. These are numbers shot. These are like a rocket shot away from reality. This one's incredible. This is a PE based on reported earnings. The difference between reported and operating earnings: reported earnings includes the write-downs, and indeed corporations have huge write-downs because with so much excess capacity of plant and equipment, what they're trying to do is, like General Motors, sell their plant, and they're selling it at some fraction of what they paid for, what's on their books. So the reported earnings are much, much lower, but look where we are at the PEs on a reported basis, 140. I mean, I don't know if the history of the world has ever been in that stratosphere before. So that's where we are, is give you some idea of how far outlandish the size of the rally has become. And I'm not here to give you any comfort if you're long in the stock market. As I gaze out, it's those who told me they were. I can't think of anything that's more scary than something like that. Although, the other side of it is the carry trade, there's still plenty of funds out there. There's still plenty of funds out there. So that is the dilemma as an investor right now. Do you continue to play it because there are more funds out there and to throw at it? Or on the other hand, my guess would be you're going to be really vulnerable, that if you hit some kind of problem on what they assume is the recovery path C and it ends up not being C, that thing could quickly readjust with leverage in the opposite direction. So you're really, you're both, on one hand, seduced to follow the trend. On the other hand, you're exposed to the risk and you see how bad it is. So therefore, we have this, again, dissonance, internal dissonance between the economists looking at the economy and those who are looking at the financial markets. Probably that dissonance has never been larger. It's certainly not based, the stock market move is certainly not based on the fundamentals of the economy. It might be based on the fundamentals of finance, which is when cash is available cheap, they'll buy it and lever up. And they all hope, like we discussed last summer, that if the markets turn around, when the music stops, they get off they find in a game of musical chairs, when the music stops, they find a chair, which is really liquidity, to sell out and get out before everyone else. And that's the bet. And if you want to take it, fine, but I'm having difficulty doing it myself. But that's really what the bet is going on. Okay, so much for the this dissonance. Now, by the way, where we stand as part of this dissonance is policymakers like the market are in the dissonance of, are we following path A, B, or C? And they're trying to figure out what to do and how much more additional stimulus to put into the market. and they're anticipating and looking at yet more fiscal policy. So now I'm at number 5, quantitative fiscal policy with a, quote, free lunch. Vice President Biden is the head of a committee which is looking at employment in the United States, and do not, I'd be very surprised if we didn't yet have another fiscal stimulus bill. So then the question becomes, looking at this dissonance, they're looking at the unemployment problem, and now they're formulating the idea of yet another fiscal stimulus package. This subject has now become front and center in financial markets, and people are looking at the economy, which is fiscal policy, because fiscal policy creates debt. And what we have is not only at the consumer level and the corporate level and over-leveraging, but the U.S. government is becoming over-leveraged to the extreme very, very rapidly. And I want to discuss that. And because it gets to the fundamental subject of, if we end up with another fiscal stimulus bill to get rid of the unemployment, it's going to be financed, it's going to create more debt. The economy is not responding. It increases the ratio of debt to income. And for those who examine sovereign risk and the willingness to hold treasuries and keep capital in the United States, the subject number 1 has become this issue of U.S. sovereign risk. And it might end up being intensified because we're following Path A. So I want to talk about understanding how you can understand the fiscal stimulus issue. Number 5 is quantitative fiscal policy with a free lunch. Part of this, I want to draw back on some of your academic background that you should have, or I expect you would have. If you go back to the macroeconomic courses that some of you had, and if you don't have it, it's easy to follow. There is one of the equations of macroeconomics is to sum up all the spending categories. And the spending categories are G for government. You might add S in savings, not savings and loan, but state and local government, SLG, let's call it. Then you have to add the consumer sector, which is a big spending sector, plus investment spending, which is plant and equipment by businesses. And then the other spending sector is net exports. So basically, in any economy, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we could probably break it down further. We could break consumption down into housing and that kind of stuff. But basically, these are 5 main categories of spending. And one of the truism, it's an identity, actually. If that much is spent with corporations, they're going to produce it, and that's called GDP. And if that much is spent with corporations in production, they distribute to the factors of production income. So it turns out all the spending, you total up all the spending, it tells you how much production you're going to have. It also tells you the same thing, it tells you how much income. So spending and income are highly related. Because a corporation produces product, gets paid, every dollar gets paid gets distributed to someone. It gets distributed to labor, it gets distributed to capital, who in turn distributes it to whoever owns the capital, or it gets distributed to rent, and then it gets distributed to who owns the building, etc. So it all comes back down to income. So in the usual fiscal policy, and this is really very, very important, you understand how the U.S. is getting into a sovereign risk problem trying to save the economy. And it's a very significant one. Okay, the usual thing is that in a situation like this, fiscal policy takes the form of the government spending. That's G. G goes up. And if G goes up, since it's a spending unit, it creates GDP and it creates income. So GDP will go up and income will go up by a similar amount.